What's up, Noodles? So this is going to be my hopefully brief-ish guide on Mirror Dungeon Hard, at least getting started, my recommendations for certain ego gifts, starting blessings, things like that. I have here a pretty typical dual keyword team open, so this is for Charge and Rupture. Most of the way the ego gifts work, and let me pull a tab over here, have requirements based on the number of sinners that are affecting that keyword. So when you combine a lot of these ego gifts, you'll note the tag that the gift activates for the encounter when 5 or more identities have attack skills that apply X keyword here, or that gain charge for charge, or that gain poise for poise. It's not always affecting a debuff on the enemy, but this kind of functionally creates the meta for the creation of Mirror Dungeon teams. In this case, there happened to be, and this was the case a long time ago, plenty of Charge and Rupture IDs. A lot of the W Core IDs are both. So that ended up being one of the pretty early use dual keywords. It is possible to use a triple keyword team, and I have a little cute MS Paint to show you for that. So this is just an example, but this is also why Kim Jae-hoon and Project Moon are pretty hesitant to release triple keyword IDs. There are a few that exist, especially ones like our core Rabbit Heathcliff is from early season 1, so probably before they really consider the repercussions of some of these things, but some of them do need more recent IDs to even be that functional. But since you need 5 IDs of each keyword, having an ID that has all 3 means that now, if you see a little kind of like a Venn diagram here, you have 5 IDs that do bleed with these 5 here on the center and the left, 5 IDs that do charge with the center and the right, and then 5 IDs that do rupture with the top 5 here. So that allows you to benefit from multiple different groups of 5 keyword ego gifts. Now, most of these ego gifts only really benefit the skills that are from that keyword to begin with, so it's not like it's making your whole team overpowered, but it does definitely allow you to benefit from combining the ego gifts from all of these different sets. So in a typical run, you have the start with 120 Starlight bonus. Starlight kind of functions as your Mirror Dungeon currency. I'm sure you probably know that already, but and as you can see from the Faust here, because this is recorded during Walpurgis, most of the time an event currency or a new unit may have a kind of a greenish part near their Starlight bonus cost. That just means that it's locked to +5 for the duration of that event. So Faust can be brought to any number of runs in a row, and will always get the +5. So something to think about if you don't really care that much about your backline, or it's a unit you're not going to use anyway, but you just want to get the +5, that we don't have to change it out every time. If you're doing different teams, you can kind of do that. So to talk about starting gifts, there are a couple that I recommend pretty generously to begin with. I used to be a little bit more keen on doing some of the later higher cost ones, but more recently I've found that like these 3 are a pretty good start. Shop ego gift choices and starting costs are good. So are the free normal refresh and free keyword refresh. This helps you really nail down, if you're looking for a specific type of keyword in a pack, that's a really good way to kind of hunt that down. For example, if you're in one of the packs that has both rupture and burn gifts, but you've got a burn team, getting a free refresh for burn will make it much more likely that you're going to be able to get those ego gifts, which will make your team more powerful. Now, one thing I've done recently this season is I almost always take Star Shower with the double plus option. Now, the the selection itself isn't super important, and obviously you can see that we're going from our base 120, we're kind of lowering ourselves a little bit here, and we're actually costing 10 to activate this. But as you can see, this has a starting cost of plus 700, which is already pretty phenomenal, because in the early stages, it's not that economy is necessarily important, but it's very frustrating to see a really good ego gift on the first floor when you haven't had a chance to acquire a budget any cost. But the real important part is that when choosing Starlight from encounter reward cards, cost plus 150. What this means is you're no longer disincentivized to picking the Starlight reward cost every single time you see it from an encounter. Typically there are 2 or 3 choices there. There's an ego gift that you can take that I'll show you in a second that can increase that choice number by 1. But most of the time you'll see, even if it's a Starlight amount, getting 8 to 12 Starlight doesn't feel very good when you're selecting it as an encounter, especially when you're looking at other options like gain a tier 2 or 3 ego gift, gain 130 to 200 cost, things like that. Well, this lets you not only select that without any worries because you're getting 150 cost to begin with, but especially in the early floors, 150 cost is more than what you would get from selecting a cost reward encounter card. So you're getting even a better reward than the current displayed rewards by selecting Starlight. And this lets you kind of maintain your Starlight economy. As you can see, I have over 12,000 Starlight, so I play Mirror Dungeon pretty frequently. I've already done the Mirror Dungeon achievements for this season, so I've probably done 60 or 70 Mirror Dungeons since the season started. But really, Starlight kind of lets you, if you have a week where you don't really want to play Mirror Dungeon too long, you can kind of just select all graces and enhance them all to +2 and breeze through it, because you're going to have a gazillion extra free costs. You're going to get a bunch of free character levels as you go through packs, a bunch of free clash power, things like that. So some of those are easier than others to take, but this is kind of my general recommendation, because now you're at net -10, but you're easily going to see at least, I would say, 3 to 5 Starlight encounters throughout a run, depending on how many floors you go to. So that's my normal typical. Now, one thing I've started doing now that I've gotten more cost is I also take Interstellar Travel. The theme pack refresh chance +2 is just so good. I mean, especially on some of the kind of early and middle floors where there are only certain floors where certain packs can appear. If your team is like, it just feels lame to see completely unthemed packs when you've got a team that could really benefit from one of the themed ones. So for example, this Charge Rupture team really wants to see Hell's Chicken on floor 2, would really like to see one of the Murder on the Warp Expresses before floor 5, things like that. So this is just one of those things that I kind of take more as a quality of life. And again, we're going to be seeing several of the Starlight packs, and I almost always go at least to floor 10, so it's pretty easy to end up with a net positive in Starlight if I'm doing it that way. Now, obviously, bare bones economy, you can decide not to select that, and we'll kind of talk about ego gifts here in a second too. Now, you never want to convert Starlight to cost, because this would mean if you don't go into the negatives, you get to keep the Starlight that you don't use as a net, as opposed to converting it to cost. Now, because I've gone into the negative anyways, this isn't going to make any difference, but I do suggest keeping your remaining Starlight instead of converting it to cost just for that run. I don't really think that's worth it. Here it's going to kind of depend on your team. Obviously, this kind of gives you your choice for starting ego gifts. Now, one thing I can recommend is if you have a team, even if you're, for example, like an all slash team or an all pierce team, I don't typically recommend taking one of the slash blender pierce, because there are fewer ego gifts of that type just in total. Makes it way easier to find those later if you end up going, okay, I have most of my, in my case, I have most of my rupture and charge ego gifts. I'm going to find slash ego gifts now. There are way fewer in that pool, so it's easier to find them. I will say for each of these, though, there is a pretty clear say, winner in terms of clash power for each of the options. For Pierce, it's the Torn Bandolier. You can see Pierce skills gain clash power +1. That's just across your whole team. Doesn't matter what keywords you have. For Blunt, it's the Temporal Bridle. This one can be upgraded to increase the amount of offense level up that you get from these effects, whereas the Torn Bandolier, the upgrade only increases like the damage done by ammo skills. And then for Slash, it's Resolution. Allies with 2 or more Slash skills for this encounter gain clash power +1 and gain 1 haste and 1 clash power +1 starting from the second turn. That does eventually upgrade into final power, which improves everything about it improves your clashing, but also improves your final damage too. So worth noting for that. I'm going to talk about Cigarette Holder just because it's here, but Cigarette Holder is a very good ego gift to keep an eye out for anyway. Cigarette Holder and Nebulizer are kind of the fan favorites for Poise because they help Poise kind of immediately activate at the start of an encounter, even if you're not using a Poise team. And also, there's another gift that's not shown here that I'll talk about in a second that helps you kind of maintain that Poise count. So it's something worth noting there. For this, because I don't really like the charge gifts super much, I'm going to take the Rupture gifts. Here's the Ego Gift starting search. Now, I have almost all of the gifts. I think you're even able to select gifts that you have not yet found in Mirror Dungeon from here, obviously only going up to tier 3. So there are tier 4 gifts that either you haven't seen or that, maybe combination only, that you'll have to kind of do some research and figure out what to do with that. The Limbus Company wiki under the Ego Fusion gifts does have all of the fusion recipes. There are some of these that are only available in hard. I can't remember exactly what the color code for some of these is, but for example, I'm pretty sure most of the time, like I think you can get maybe Bloody Mist, but you can't get Devotion because Millarca might only be hard mode only, which means, oh, never mind. It's something like that. Maybe you can get Bloody Mist, but you can't get the Hemorrhagic Shock, something like that. But anyways, in hard mode, they're all available. So it's worth kind of keeping an eye on what you may or may not combine. It's also worth noting again, like Charge and Poise gifts, you can probably benefit from them. There are certain ones that kind of just ask if your character has charge count or poise count, which you can get from gifts. They don't have to be from skills. But you'll want to make sure that you're not combining those, because then you won't have 5 of a kind and you'll lose all of the benefits from doing that. Another one worth noting, and I'll kind of point this out right away, is the Hoarfrost Footprint. Once you get into the harder stages of Mirror Dungeon, you're doing past floor 10 adversity runs and stuff. This is a gift that you can really only get really early in the run, if you do or don't even combine it, but I mean just in early packs. These packs can only be found on floor 1 and 2. It is technically a syncing gift, but it doesn't require any team-specific things. And it does note that enemies with syncing, and it does give yourself a little bit of syncing, but it's pretty trivial. But enemies with syncing lose 2 clash power, and that's a complete, just blanket -2 clash power. Is very important as you get later in the runs, because every little bit of clash power you can remove from your enemies and give to yourself is going to make it possible to win some of those clashes, and that means you can complete the encounter without getting blasted. So as those happen, kind of pay attention to that. There is also a starting grace that I didn't really look into very much, but it has to do with when you combine ego gifts, giving you a free ego gift 1 tier lower. That's important because this lets you, if you start with these 2, or you start with 1 and you go to the pack that gives the other and find it in the shop, you can combine a tier 4 on floor 1 with only 2 gifts, which is pretty rare. Most of the time, if you have a super shop, you can combine a couple 4 tier 2 gifts or something to make a tier 4, but being able to combine a tier 4 right away on floor 1 is going to be pretty important for just early economy and stuff, and this is one of the ways that people tend to do it. Another thing to pay attention to is, depending on your team, there will be other both intervallo theme packs and other things that you can benefit from. So for example, recently there were a couple more middle IDs released, but some of these are like, if you have 2 or more, 3 or more middle IDs, there isn't technically a middle like pack, and they're considered, they're blunt using bleed IDs, but getting nocturnal sweeping Bakgak to get the ones that will benefit the middle substantially is a really good idea. There is also a boss from Canto 5 that you can find in the theme packs from floors 11 to 15 that just, the ego gift when you defeat that person just gives you immediately free middle buffs from that gift as well. So something to consider when you're hunting for floor 11 plus packs as well. One thing I did also want to mention, and this is kind of counterintuitive, which is why I'm going to bring it up here, there are gifts for each of the damage types that mention. I think it's Red Tassel for slashing, it's Equalizer for piercing, and then it's the Knuckle Dusters for blunt. The way that resistance to your attacks in this game is worded fairly weird. So what this is actually saying is if the target is strong to pierce, it lowers their resistance to pierce. I don't exactly understand why it's phrased this way, if it's just a translation error, if it's the way that it's kind of expecting you to be explained, but it's not saying if it's weak to pierce, they get more resistant to pierce. That's not what these gifts do. They lower the resistance so that your attacks aren't going to be completely whiffs against some of the mobs that you fight won't be completely resistant to your attacks. This is worth considering getting in the start. For the cost of 70. If you have an almost mono damage type team, because you don't want to end up with like 2 packs in a row, and I don't think anybody really keeps track of every single monster damage type resistance and stuff when they're going through packs. But if you have like all slash, or let's say again you're doing the middle, like I don't want to fight 2 packs where they're accidentally resistant to blunt the whole time. I'd rather just take the middle style Knuckle Dusters, have them be mostly neutral to blunt instead because of this gift, and then kind of go from there. Another reason why you would use the ego gift search in more difficult runs is that you are trying to plan your packs out to avoid having to go to certain packs. So for example, if you're already taking the Knuckle Dusters, you may go, okay, well then I don't need to go to the pack that has those. But the one that has those also happens to have, I believe, the Stolen Fixer magazine, which just gives blunt power up to all characters. It's a free clash power / final power basically, and then gives blunt damage up if MVL res is activated. You can imagine that's also for the middle. And Counterstar if there are 4 more middles on the battlefield. Inflict Vengeance Mark. So some of the ones that this isn't from. This is from the story, from a story pack, not from the Nocturnal Sweeping. So these aren't like middle specific in general. Like again, this is just blunt resistance. That has nothing to do with the middle technically, even though it's called the middle style Knuckle Dusters. But something worth considering if you're planning to, skip a pack or not have to find it if you're like, oh, I want to play. So for example, like if I don't want to go to this pack, but I still want to use my thumb IDs and I want to have some Tremor Scorch support, I might take the Searing Hammer just to start off with for fun, because that's, it's kind of what cost is for us for having fun as well. I'm probably not going to start with any right now, but I am going to say that it is worth paying attention to. So for example, like a lot of these Rupture gifts are either from one of the Intervalos Nocturnal Sweeping or the LCCB checkup. So I'm going to keep an eye out for those packs because some of them are quite good, give clash power, make it way easier to apply statuses, some things like that. If you're going for a really hard run, it's more worth considering starting with keywordless ego gifts. Keywordless ego gifts are very strong. Obviously, they're not dependent on a status or anything like that. But what's also worth noting is you can't search for keywordless ego gifts. When we talked about the free refresh and the free keyword selection, you can search for like a blunt gift, a slash gift, a charge gift, a rupture gift, but you can't specifically hone in for keywordless ego gifts. So some of them are going to be quite strong, particularly, so for example, for healing, Lithograph is really good. Whenever an enemy is staggered, the ally with the least HP heals for 5% of their HP. This is good because this can allow you to like dodge on the character that is low HP and have someone else kind of provide healing for them. Phlebotomy Pack I used to like a lot because when you're damaging someone, you're healing for some of your missing HP, but that also means that your character that probably already lost the clash, might not even be at max sanity, now has to win a different clash, and the healing is fairly trivial compared to like missing HP compared to max HP, is pretty different. The blue Zippo lighter, you've probably seen this somewhere in a guide, but being able to get free resources at every single turn start is pretty ridiculous. It's also, it hones in on Gloom, so teams that don't have very good Gloom generation can all of a sudden use all of their egos because of blue Zippo lighter by itself. It's not super hard to find, and obviously you'd probably buy it almost every time you'd see it. But when you get to the higher adversities, when it starts making your egos cost 2 or 3 times their normal ego value, it's good to have an early ego resource economy to think of it that way, in some sense. Another one is cost economy. So these 3 gifts are pretty good in terms of cost. There's the Milepost of Survival that gives cost when you complete the floor, Golden Urn, which gives cost based on the encounter combat, and then Voracious Hammer, which has to do with enemies defeated. Those are all pretty good to keep an eye out for. Not necessarily that you need to start with them, but just good to keep an eye out for. Another one I'll mention in terms of ego cost economy is Oracle. Oracle converts your most owned to random least owned. This at least prevent you from having a glaring hole in your ego resource generation. So if your team doesn't really generate lust, but you have an ego that really needs lust, instead of having to like wait around for blue Zippo or something to help you with that, the Oracle will at least fill in that gap for you. Especially useful on ones that are like for example, I'm going to go back to the middle again because they're all envy. Is like if you're spamming envy and you only really are getting lust and maybe wrath otherwise, and there's some pride and some gluttony in there too, I guess, but basically you're not really generating gloom. So if you don't have a blue Zippo lighter, being able to get an Oracle to at least feed your gloom is going to be pretty useful there. Chow Within a Flask used to be really bad, and now they at least buffed it a little bit. It used to be just 1 ego resource for every sin of divinity in the encounter start. Now it at least gives at least a little bit more than that. It's gained 2 resources for the 2 least owned affinities, so it's kind of in a similar vein to kind of helping shore up some of your weaknesses. But typically you're going to want something like Coffee and Crames, which is a turn start, or blue Zippo are going to be the better versions for that. If you're doing a really considering the economy run, these are 3 of the more important ones. Not that you need to start with all 3, but these are ones to keep an eye out for. I would typically recommend starting with the Prestige card. Just lets you have 30% cost reduction on all of your purchases, which is pretty important. There's a blessing that allows you to have your first ego gift sold each floor sell for twice the normal sale cost. So that plus this means that there's actually a way to like buy an ego gift and then sell it for more than you bought it for, only for the first one each floor. But and normally you're going to use it to sell the like duplicate ego gift cartridges. It's kind of hard to, I can't remember exactly what those are called, but ones that are like, if you were to get a dupe of an ego gift, instead of giving you nothing, it gives you like this little white flask container that just functions as that in terms of for fusing and stuff. It doesn't actually have any other benefit, but that's what you would use them for, is either for fusing or for selling for double price. Shop skill replacement cost, as you go through, especially as you get into the higher floors, and this is one of the things that makes the economy so rough if you're going for like a floor 15 run, is you're almost always going to want to be replacing skills that your units have from skill 1s and then eventually skill 2s into skill 3s, because that's just going to make your overall combat stronger. Obviously it's balanced around the fact that in a normal run you get your 12 quote unquote skill cards, which is 6 skill 1s, 4 skill 2s, and 2 skill 3s. This changes that deck to be replacing, 1 or 2s with 3s. There are plenty of also ego gifts that that give incredible bonuses, but only for skill 3s. So, for example, the pocket watches, you can see here that to ally skill 3s that inflict tremor potency counter unique tremor, plus coin power plus 2 and deal plus 25% damage. It's pretty bananas effect. That only applies to skill 3s though, so you don't want to have skill 1s that are, and there are some gifts that buff like skill 1s and skill 2s here and there, and I understand it, but almost always you're going to want to have it, especially your heavy hitters or the ones that are benefiting from gifts like this, to have skill 3s for the most part. One other thing worth noting, and I think I'll point this out with this, is so Rabbit Core Heathcliff, each of his skills, he has got a skill bleed on his skill 1, I think charge on his skill 2, and rupture on his skill 3. You have to at least have one of the skills to qualify for the ego gifts. So one thing, like if I'm doing one of these runs, I have to remember to leave him with at least one skill 1 and at least one skill 2, because if I replace them all into skill 3s, the whole comp is broken, because now he's only a rupture ID, not a bleeder ID or a charge ID, so all of those gifts will fail to work. So it is worth noting that. It's also worth noting that if a character, some of the ego or some of the ID sorting websites will explain that an ID is both tremor and burn and bleed, which I believe is the middle Heathcliff from this season, but he's not actually a tremor, because tremor is only on his empowered skill 3, and empowered skill 3, like a skill 3-2, if it's not in their regular deck, it might show up on one of the websites that sorts by keywords, because technically it can apply the keyword, but it doesn't function that way for ego gifts. So that's not a triple keyword ID. It's just bleed and burn. So that's something worth note as well, is just in terms of skill and stuff. That's not really explained super well anywhere, but it's pretty important to know. And then, of course, ego gift enhance cost. As you go, a lot of the ego gifts will be strong, but their real strength for plenty of them lies in their enhanced effects. Some of them even double their effects when they're enhanced. Like there's an ego gift that gives +5 to all identity levels, and it can be enhanced to go all the way up to +10, and that's going to cost you just as much, if not more, as buying the ego gift to begin with. So this ends up being useful. Now this is in some ways better and in some ways worse than the prestige card. Of course, you can get an ID or you can get an ego gift that you didn't have to buy, and then you're just enhancing, but there are also plenty of gifts that are just as strong as they can be out the gate and can't be enhanced at all. So it kind of balances itself out there, in that you're not going to be able to buy every single ego gift, but you're not going to be able to enhance every single ego gift either. So it's just something worth keeping an eye on. There are plenty of other really strong ego gifts here that are worth kind of paying attention to. I'm not going to go through every single strong ego gift. You can kind of look at them on your own time. One that I am going to mention, though, well, I guess two, Sharp Needle and Thread and Tango Marinade. These are both from Hell's Kitchen, which is, again, a 4/2 only theme pack. The important part about Sharp Needle and Thread is the way that it works, and it explains the first skill to deal damage to an enemy deals bonus fixed damage by half the damage dealt. But what this means is that if your first character uses an AoE ego and does 200 damage to 5 enemies, it counts it as 1,000 damage, which means it does 200 damage to all 5 enemies, and then it does a fixed 500 to all 5 of them again. So you can see how tremendously overpowered that is, especially in solo runs. That Sharp Needle and Thread tends to be one of the really important pickups, because there are times where you have to clash against, you're not going to be able to clash against 5 enemies if you're in a solo, but if you can clash against one enemy and stagger all 5, now all of a sudden you're safe. And you can continue the run. Tango Marinade, if the unit speed is faster than the target's, gain speed divided by 3 clash power. This is another just really uncopyable way to gain clash power. There are plenty of ways to gain haste and plenty of ways to bind the enemy with other ego gifts, and some ego gifts that can function automatically. Like for Tremor, I can't really explain it right now because it's a tier 4 gift, but there's a gift called Downpour that automatically does Tremor Burst at the end of a turn, and there's a tremor gift called Reverberation that applies bind to targets with tremor, and this can be enhanced as well, so it's easier to activate and is even stronger than it shows here. So those are ones that are worth kind of keeping an eye out for. Typically, though, if you're going through cost and you're in a situation where you're not really trying to push floors or anything like that, again, if you're doing an economy run where you're kind of just going like this, it's probably better to just not pick any gifts. But again, it's pretty safe to just get at least one of the damage type reduction ones, but only really worth considering if you're getting multiple, if you're using almost entirely that one damage type on your team, because otherwise, if you've got 7 units and you've got 2 to 3 of each unit doing each damage type, you'll get through it mostly around the same speed either way, without being walled. So I think that'll be kind of it for now. I did want to talk a little bit about some of the strength of the types of keywords. So there are going to be other places online that have done even more mirror dungeons than me that have a better sense of what dual keywords are best to use. I suspect you might have a hard time finding one that's completely up to date with how strong Tremor Burn is if you're watching it in early July of 2026 when the Walpurgis came out that just added a couple more units of that type. That's going to affect how easy it is to get those. One thing I will mention, I guess, since I'm thinking about it, there are some gifts that will pop up that are based on a current event, even if a theme pack itself is not added. So when this Walpurgis landed, a wing-shaped waxen candle activates if there are 3 more Dawn Office entities, which of course is the 2 new ones, and then the old Sinclair that can give buffs. This is another one that you might just want to start with kind of just for fun, but worth keeping out for, because there aren't enough IDs, and Dawn Office itself it's not going to have its own pack. We're not getting a full Walpurgis story with this Walpurgis. There are Walpurgis packs that do that sometimes, but that's not the case with this one. So just a good idea to keep an eye out for certain ego gifts that give benefits to things like that. All right, but I'll end it here, and if you have any questions, just leave a comment or hit me up on Discord. Catch you later.